Please, somebody, help me. The voice barely rose above the roar of muddy water rushing through Willow Creek's forgotten back road. Garrett Whitfield had just locked up his father's old hardware shop, arms full of emergency supplies, rope, flashlights, tarps, when he heard it. At 33, his hands were calloused from years of hard work, his shoulders broad from lifting lumber and restocking shelves since dawn. Since their parents died in a house fire 6 years ago, he'd raised his sister Lily alone, keeping Whitfield Hardware alive, working 70-hour weeks so she could finish community college. He'd been preparing for the storm, knowing the creek could turn dangerous, but that desperate cry stopped him cold. Through sheets of rain, he saw the SUV, sleek, black, expensive, tilted at an angle in the flash flood, water rising fast around it. A woman clung to the doorframe, terror written across her face. Garrett didn't think. He never did when someone needed help. He dropped the supplies and waded into the current, feeling it pull at his legs, his worn boots slipping on the mud. The water was chest-high when he reached her, and rising. "Take my hand," he said quietly, extending his rough palm toward her trembling fingers. "I've got you, I promise." Victoria Ashford had driven through 43 countries, closed billion-dollar deals in boardrooms across 6 continents, but she'd never felt fear like this. At 30, she'd built an empire from her late mother's small investment firm, proving everyone wrong, especially her father, who'd wanted her to marry into old money rather than earn her own. Her husband had left when the company nearly collapsed 3 years ago, taking half her assets and all her trust. She'd been driving from Chicago to Willow Creek to surprise her father with a visit when the storm hit without warning, when the peaceful creek became a raging monster and the road vanished beneath a wall of water. Now this stranger, this man with kind eyes and dirt under his fingernails, was risking his life for hers. His grip was steady as he pulled her free, wrapping his arm around her waist as they fought against the current. She felt his heart hammering against her shoulder, felt him stumble but refused to let go. When they finally reached higher ground, both collapsed onto the muddy bank, gasping. "Thank you," Victoria whispered, rainwater mixing with tears. "Thank you." Garrett just nodded, too exhausted for words. He helped her to his old pickup truck, gave her his only dry flannel shirt, and drove her to the nearest motel, 20 miles away. Before she stepped out, he grabbed a scrap of paper from the glove compartment and wrote down his name and the shop's address. In case you need anything," he said quietly, pressing it into her hand. She tried to give him money. He refused. "Just be safe," he said softly, and drove back into the storm. Victoria sat in that motel room all night, staring at the paper. Garrett Whitfield, Whitfield Hardware, Route 7, Willow Creek. The name stirred something deep in her memory, something her father had mentioned years ago. She'd made calls, arranged for her car to be recovered, contacted her assistant, but she couldn't stop thinking about the man who'd asked for nothing. The next morning, she didn't continue to her father's estate. She drove back to Willow Creek, to that address on the paper, determined to find Garrett, to thank him properly. What she found changed everything. When Victoria pulled up to the weathered building with Whitfield Hardware painted in faded letters, her heart clenched. The shop was old but clean, organized with care despite its age. Through the window, she saw Garrett restocking shelves despite his obvious exhaustion. A young woman, early 20s, bright-eyed, emerged from the back with coffee. "Garrett, you need to rest," Lily said gently. "Can't, Lil. Mrs. Henderson needs supplies for her roof repair, and we need—" He stopped when he saw Victoria standing in the doorway. "I wanted to thank you properly," Victoria said, stepping inside. "I'm Victoria Ashford, and I owe you my life." Garrett wiped his hands on his jeans, embarrassed. "You don't owe me anything, ma'am." But Victoria had done her research overnight. She knew about the fire, the debt, the sacrifices. She knew Garrett had deferred his own dreams. He'd been accepted to engineering school once to keep his father's shop alive and raise Lily. She knew he worked from sunrise to sunset and still struggled to make ends meet. And she knew what kindness looked like. That evening, Victoria finally drove to her father's estate. Harrison Ashford was waiting anxiously, having heard about the flash flood. When Victoria told him what happened, when she showed him the paper with Garrett's name and the shop address, her father's face transformed. "Whitfield Hardware, Route 7, Willow Creek," Harrison whispered, sinking into his chair. His hands trembled as he reached for his desk drawer, pulling out an old business card with that same address. "Victoria, 3 years ago, I had a medical emergency driving through these parts. A heart attack. I was alone on that back road, and I thought that was the end." Victoria's breath caught. "What happened?" "A man from that hardware shop, Thomas Whitfield. He found me collapsed by my car. He didn't hesitate, called for help, stayed with me, held my hand and told me stories to keep me conscious until the ambulance arrived." Harrison's voice broke. "He saved my life. When I tried to repay him, he refused everything, said he was just doing what anyone should do. But he let me write down his shop address, and I promised him that if his family ever needed anything, I'd be there." Tears streamed down Victoria's face. "And then?" "I heard about the fire a few months later. Thomas and his wife both gone. I tried to find out if there were children, but by the time I learned the truth, I didn't know how to reach out. I kept that address in my drawer, hoping someday." Harrison looked at his daughter with wonder. "And now his son saved you, the same way, the same kindness." Victoria felt the weight of it, this invisible thread connecting their families across time, woven by simple acts of courage. Over the next 3 months, Victoria and her father returned to Willow Creek again and again. Harrison finally fulfilled his old promise, but not with charity, with opportunity. He helped Lily apply for scholarships at the best schools. He offered Garrett a partnership to expand the hardware store into surrounding counties, and together with Victoria's company, they hired him to consult on a sustainable building project, designing affordable community centers for rural areas. They never offered handouts. They offered the chance Thomas Whitfield's son deserved. Victoria told herself it was gratitude, but truthfully, she found something there she'd lost in her glass towers and corner offices: humanity. But it was Garrett who taught her the greater lesson. One evening, sitting on the shop's back porch as autumn painted the hills gold, Victoria finally asked the question that haunted her. "Why did you jump in that water? You didn't know me. I could have been anyone." Garrett was quiet for a long moment, watching the sunset. "My dad used to say, we're all just walking each other home. Some days you need help, some days you give it. That's all there is." Victoria felt something break open inside her. "I spent years believing success meant standing alone, that needing help was weakness." "Maybe," Garrett said softly, "maybe strength is knowing we're all connected, that your pain matters to me, even if we're strangers." The revelation came weeks later, during a quiet dinner at Harrison's home. He'd invited Garrett and Lily, wanting them there, wanting to tell them everything. When they all sat together by the fireplace, Harrison pulled out that old business card and placed it on the table. "Garrett, 3 years ago, your father saved my life. I made him a promise that day, that I'd watch over his family if anything happened. But I failed. I didn't know about the fire soon enough, didn't know you and Lily were struggling alone all these years." Garrett's eyes widened, tears forming.
My father, he never told us. He never mentioned saving anyone. Because that's who he was, Harrison said softly, his own voice thick with emotion. Just like you. You jumped into that flood without knowing who Victoria was, without expecting anything, just like your father pulled over for a dying stranger on a lonely road. Kindness was his legacy to you, son. The room fell silent. Victoria watched her father embrace Garrett, this kind, humble man who'd inherited his father's heart and understood. Kindness isn't a transaction. It's a legacy that echoes through generations, connecting souls across time in ways we never imagine. Harrison offered to pay off Garrett's debts to fund his education. Garrett accepted only the education, and only because Lily pushed him. "You've given everything for me," she said, tears streaming. "Let someone give something back to you." 3 years later, Garrett completed his engineering degree while keeping the hardware store thriving. Victoria's company hired him to lead their community development division, designing affordable housing for rural areas. Lily became a teacher, working with at-risk youth, and Victoria learned to lead with her heart as much as her head, establishing a foundation for people facing crisis, naming it after Thomas Whitfield. But the moment that mattered most came one quiet morning when Garrett and Victoria sat by Willow Creek, watching the water flow peacefully where it had once raged. "You know what I think about?" Victoria said softly. "That day changed me more than you'll ever know. I was drowning long before that flood, drowning in loneliness, in believing I had to be strong enough to need no one." Garrett took her hand gently. "And you know what I learned? Sometimes the people we save end up saving us right back." The creek whispered its ancient song, two souls, once strangers, now forever connected by a single act of courage born from simple kindness, a kindness that traveled through time, from father to son, creating circles of grace that would ripple forward into lives not yet touched. Kindness costs nothing, but its value is immeasurable. When we extend our hand to lift someone up, we discover that we too are lifted. In a world that often feels cold and divided, every act of compassion creates ripples that touch shores we'll never see. We're all walking each other home. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, subscribe, and comment. Let's spread more stories of kindness and hope together.